Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Brian Thatcher, and welcome to Mercy Unbound. It's a series that aims to provide hope, an avenue for healing, and one that will help you better understand and then live the great mercy of God. With me today, I have a special guest, Dr. Peter Howard, who founded and is president of the Fulton Sheen Institute. He has a doctorate in theology from the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, and perchance today is his feast day. And that's called the Angelicum in Rome, Italy. He's president of the Fulton Sheen Institute. He speaks at many conferences. He's been on numerous radio interviews, founder and host of the Catholic Patriot podcast. And we're going to have him give you the how to get to those podcasts. So I want you guys your pencil and paper. He and his wife, Chantel, have 6 children. And in today's show, I asked Dr. Howard to be with us to share with us about the venerable servant of God, Bishop Fulton Sheen. Welcome, Dr. Howard.
Thanks, Brian. It's great to be on your show. This is awesome.
Before we get into the meat of the show, I want you to tell the audience where they can find your podcast, where they can find the videos of Fulton Sheen, and tell us how you got to be so interested in Fulton Sheen. With your theological degree, it only makes sense, but and then you founded the Fulton Sheen Institute. What was the spark that started all that?
Wow. Okay. I'm going to see if I can summarize a lot of that. First, you can find access to everything that you just mentioned at fultonsheen.institute. fultonsheen.institute. On there, you'll see a link to podcasts, and you go to that page, and it gives you all the links so you can sign up on your Apple Podcasts, Spotify, I think, and a whole bunch of other ones, as well as the video versions of it. We have a YouTube channel. Just look up Fulton Sheen Institute on YouTube. It'll pop up. And also on Rumble, we have 2 accounts because when you get into things that the world doesn't want you to talk about via YouTube, you get blocked and censored. Like right now, I'm actually getting off of a week of being blocked because they didn't like what I had to say in one of my podcast interviews with Daniel O'Connor. But you can get a direct link to those at fultonsheen.institute, and you can also get, there's a link to a course that's all on Fulton Sheen, and it's really how you understand the world right now. How do you make sense of the world? And it's called The Final Hour, Fulton Sheen's Plan to Save America and the World. It's 30 hours worth of content, but it's like the course you wish you always took that would have really... It saved a lot of time, even though it's that long. You can pick and choose the videos. There's 4 modules. I think it's exactly what Catholics need today to really understand what's going on now, how we got here, and how we can really bring the world back to God through that lens and an example of Sheen. As far as Sheen's videos himself, I don't have that centralized. I wish I did. I'd have to have all the rights to them. But you can just find them on YouTube. There's a great app, though, that's not connected to what I do, but it's just the Fulton Sheen app.
Really?
And it has 300 of his talks. So I'd recommend, just get it on your iPhone and pop it right in. You'll see it. It's worth whatever it is. It's not even expensive. But my goodness, they're all there. So that's a great way to do that. So now shifting gears to how I got into my life. That takes me back to 1997, and I was in a period of discernment in my life and of my vocation, really in a pivotal part. I graduated college by then, and at Franciscan University, spent some time in Italy, discerning, came back. Time of confusion, and at any rate, I was teaching in Dallas, Texas, and I just said, I got to go on retreat. So I took a personal retreat for a weekend, went to East Texas. And on my way out, my sister said, "Hey, Pete, why don't you take these tapes, the age of cassette tapes?" And this is a retreat that was given by Archbishop Sheen that completely transformed our pastor. He was a young priest where they were, and he had just died of cancer. So he was very young. But he was at this retreat in 1972 at Holy Trinity Seminary in Dallas. And she said it defined the rest of his life to the day he died. And so I was like, wow, that's pretty powerful. I've heard of this man. strangely enough, he's never studied in theology classes. You hear from maybe hear a little bit there. But I'm like, all right, I'll give him a shot. 3-hour drive. So I put in the first tape, and then in the first 10 minutes, not even 5 to 10 minutes, I was completely hooked on this man. I felt like he was sitting in my car. I felt like those who listen to Jesus and would say, who's this man who speaks to us with such authority? And I've studied with some of the best theologians out there and professors, but when I was listening to him, I felt like he just grabbed my soul, and it was a moment of not judgment, but it was like, this is a pivot point in your life. And Fulton Sheen even talks about that. In your life, you have maybe 1-2 key moments that how you decide that will determine the rest of your life. And for me, that ended up being one of them. And this retreat that was for priests and seminarians, even though I'm not a priest now, as I listened, I said, this is critical for every single Catholic to hear. If God wants me to be a priest, I'm going to be preaching this stuff. If I'm a layman, I'm going to be teaching this stuff. And I'm going to be passing this on to my family. It's going to be everywhere I go. And lo and behold, I never would have thought that, years later, when I was studying in Rome, that his cause for canonization would go up. And then I was able to write on him, study him, and then eventually do my doctorate on him. And I knew that his mission to basically, know what the world is thinking and expose its errors and give solutions from the wisdom of the church, especially from St. Thomas, who, like I said in the beginning, he's just a man who had a comprehensive view of the world and of theology. And nobody knew that at Fulton Sheen. You never really talked about it. But that's really what drove him on his TV series and everything else. And I felt a calling that this mission needs to continue for this moment in history, because he prophesied this moment in history. He said, we're in the 1940s, we're living in the days of the apocalypse, the last days of our era. And the mystical force, the two great forces of the mystical body of Christ and the mystical body of Antichrist have now set up the battle lines for the catastrophic contest. And now here we are at the moment of great awakening and great decision. And I just can't think of a better figure to help lead the church, especially in the United States, on this really this crusade to bring our country back to God in a bold way, and in a clever way. He just had a way of reaching so many people,
Yeah,
So that's kind of how things got to where they are now. And then over the last year and a half was when I launched the Fulton Sheen Institute, and it's been building up that kind of mission ever since and expanding it in podcasting. So it's it's an exciting mission.
Now, he started out in radio
Mm-hmm.
and then went into television, black and white. He was so theatrical. I mean, he was a great speaker, and he'd walk around and he'd use gestures and everything. But how would you describe him as a prophet for our times with what he's saying 50, 60, 70 years ago?
Right. Well, what sparked him in the beginning was that desire. When he became a priest, was to be on the forefront of the world's thinking, and his understanding of history as well, and the dynamics that were driving the church and the world to where it was, in the early part of the 20th century. He saw where it was going. And while a lot of people said, well, we survived World War I, we survived World War II, and after World War II, what they call it kind of the glory days, the greatest generation, he was already warning America that if you don't radically turn back to God right now, communism is going to take you over. Now, who in the world would have ever thought that? Many people don't realize he was the #1 voice against communism in America. So much so that President Roosevelt had called him in and basically said, you got to tone down your rhetoric, Monsignor Sheen. Like, Russia's our friend. And he basically said, well, I don't know if he just nodded his head or if exactly what his response was, but it was basically like, okay, thank you, but I got to do what I have to do. And so he began to talk a lot about how really the future of America teetered on whether or not it would fully embrace its Christian responsibilities. And by the time he died, and that was 1979, in that last decade of his life, he had put together a series, and it's been called What Now America? Sometimes it's like under Quo Vadis America, where are you going America? And basically saying that it was a decaying civilization. And he said, if we don't get our morals back, then he says communism comes in as a scavenger to a civilization that's already dying. And so he, when I hear things like that and I look to today, we're there. I mean, I don't know if we can't see it by this point. It's something where, it's I don't know what will make us see that. Right. But there's, we live in an age of deception. And I had a quote in front of me I pulled up just thinking about this from him. And he said, "A great burden is thrust upon men who call themselves religious. In this fatal hour, all of their energies should be spent recalling man to his spiritual destiny and summoning him to invoke the God who made him. Let those who call themselves Catholics or Protestants or Jews recall that the function of their religion is to intensify the spiritual life of man and not to empty the vials of bitterness into hearts, stirring up one against another." That was also an impetus for me to, for my own passion to start an institute. And what role can I play in this? But right now, the leaders are few. The leaders are few, even though we know who they are because our networks feel tighter. But in the great scheme of things, we're seeing the biggest decline. Right. So somebody's not stepping up.
What's interesting that all he spoke about so many years ago are so relevant today. And like you said, how can you not see it? But that's the way the world is right now.
It is. And, he was a hopeful man too. He did say, America is going to be brought down to its knees. But he says it will be either voluntary or involuntary. And he says he prayed. And he ended one of his broadcasts with this quote on, I think it was his broadcast on communism, where he said, pray to God that America is not brought to its knees only by ruin, but by lifting up its soul. And, it's amazing how boldly he spoke to his audiences that were, remember, this is predominantly non-Catholic. 60% of his audience was non-Catholic when he was on TV. Everybody kind of thinks, the Catholic world. The Catholics are small. And that's why so many people remember him. But he would talk about our Blessed Mother. He had a great devotion to Mary. And that really was one of his cause for great hope. He was very optimistic, more about Russia than he was America. He said Russia is going to be coming back, and this was amazing. He said Russia will basically lead the world in evangelization. As strong as communism held them, because as he said, they had an Asiatic soul, and that's what communism needed to catch fire and go around. They were so strong. He said the West was weak. We were behind a silk curtain, and he said, but when they convert, that intensity, that strength is going to be right toward the faith, and they will help lead the world back. And we see that even today. You have to go right through all the propaganda, and Russia is actually much stronger in returning more quickly to their Christian roots than anyone else is in the West, as Europe is just rotting.
Yeah. Wasn't he amazing in the sense, though, being so smart? I believe he won a award as a great theologian in France, and then he taught at Catholic University. But didn't he have the ability to bring it down to the average person and speak to their heart?
He did. I mean, that was his goal. He said he wanted to be able to bring truth down to, basically like somebody in the 7th or 8th grade. And if you can't do that, you don't understand what you're talking about. So that was his that was his purpose from the very beginning. I mean, of course, he won this award when he was in his post-college days, you can say, in Europe. He went to the prestigious institute at the time called the Institute of Philosophy in Louvain in Belgium, and he not only got his doctorate there, he was invited to take this exam, and it was the agrégé in philosophy. And so he was the first American who went through it and received the greatest award you could get, because you were graded by what you were served at dinner. So if you were served with water, you passed, and then if you passed with distinction, then it was with beer, and then if you with higher distinction, then it was wine, and then if you had the greatest, highest distinctions, then it was champagne. And how he described how the champagne just kept coming that evening. And so, and then his work that he wrote for his thesis, he put into a book called God and Intelligence, which it's a philosophical work, but it's actually not that difficult to read. And G.K. Chesterton even wrote the introduction to it, or the foreword to it. And it really mapped out the stage in which he was going to be entering into, and the problem that had to be solved. As you remove God from society, so goes the light of the intellect. And here we are today. Up is down, left is right. There's no man, there's no woman. Whatever you want. I mean, Sheen would be going crazy right now. I'd love to see what he would do. But he gave us the framework, though, because he said all the perversions of mental illness and immorality, it all comes down to just being really unhinged from God. That was a pretty bold statement.
With all of his great shows that were watched by millions, he had a good sense of humor, didn't he?
He did. He had a great sense of humor. I always try to remember his jokes, when you listen to his recordings. He'd always begin his talks with a joke. But it'd be rare that maybe in a retreat he wouldn't do it like that. But his normal talks, he always began with a joke, and of course that was intentional. He liked to break the ice with the audience, and you draw them in, and yeah, he took himself lightly despite the intensity of his message. And I think that was felt everywhere, from receiving awards and saying, I want to give thanks to my four writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And even Milton Berle's like, well, if I'm going to lose to somebody, I guess I'm losing to somebody who's like God, who works for God. Yeah. So, yeah, he had a levity to him, and he loved children. I think because deep down he knew that holiness was always, we need to become like little children. And for a man of his caliber of intellect, he could relate to everybody, and every single person mattered.
Now, he's a declared venerable, and can you walk us through those stages and where things are at on beatification, and explain to the audience what's going on with that process?
Sure. Well, he's all but beatified now, and that process begins when a diocese takes up the cause, as they call it, and they submit his name and a kind of a general background of him to Rome. And then if they find that there seems to be strong enough evidence of people, they call it kind of a cult, but not in the word, the way the world sees it. A cult just means like a following of devotion. Then he's worthy to follow it as an example. So he becomes a servant of God at that point. Now they really investigate his life. And then that's where all the investigation really begins. And they go through everything he's ever written and everything he's ever said. Everything that's been recorded of him. So you can imagine what that must have been like. Every article he wrote gets scrutinized. And then they have a canonical director/advisor of the process in America, in this case, the Diocese of Peoria, and then they work with the Congregation for Saints. And so anyway, after that whole process is done, witnesses, people who knew him, his family, everybody, so they could find out if there was anything really questionable about him, where he worked, what his life was like as a priest, as a bishop. And then they put all of these acts, you can call it, into various volumes, and they condense them and they ship them to Rome. Rome goes through that, and if there's evidence in there of heroic virtue, because that's what they're looking for, virtue, then he gets the title venerable. Now he can be venerated. And then after that, really, it's a matter of the approval process of having one miracle being validated by a medical review board and a theological review board in Rome for the Congregation of Saints. And once that happens, then that's the evidence that he is in heaven. And secondly, and he's interceding. And then it's really just a formality, but you then schedule the Mass that would proclaim him within the context of the liturgy, added to the canon of saints as a blessed. And that process was moved along. There was a miracle approved of a family in Peoria, and within a few months of all of that being approved, they had the date set in December, and they had his feast day was even established for December 9th. And next thing you know, the plug got pulled, and then the drama got even more intense, because there was already drama about his body. That was the other thing. He was in New York, in the Cathedral of St. Patrick, and then Peoria wanted the body, since they did the whole cause. So,
can I interrupt? Wasn't that his first assignment in New York? And is that why they felt they had, quote, rights to his body? Or how did New York?
Well, he ended up in New York, really. He taught at Catholic University for 20 years. So he wasn't. He was attached to the diocese of Peoria, and his bishop let him go to there, out there. But he did so much of all of his media, his radio show, the Catholic Hour, and then eventually the TV. He did all of that work in New York, and so he became so intertwined. And then, of course, he became auxiliary bishop of New York when he was made the national director for the Society of the Propagation of the Faith, which ran all the missions, not just in the United States, but they had one of the biggest purses to oversee for the whole world. And that's when he became Archbishop in 1951, I think it was. And so, anyway, so New York's sort of he's their boy, he's their man, and that's what he was always associated with. Nobody probably even knew he was from Peoria. So when the cause was initiated, New York had a chance to do it. They could have led the whole thing, but they totally hands off. And then in the end, it was more like almost wanting the credit and then having the body. So when all the faithful come flocking to find and see Sheen and pray, well, it's great for the Archdiocese of New York, and then yet the people who made that happen are in Peoria. So that became a rift, was where was his body going to go? What was his last will and testament? And then eventually it was his next of kin, who's Cunningham is the last name, and she launched a case to I think she got disgusted about the battle and said, we gotta fix this. And she went all the way through the court system of New York to the Supreme Court of New York, who upheld every decision to release the body to her. And then she was going to have the body brought to Peoria, where they have a special place on the side altar for him, where he is now.
I want to give a little shout out to Peoria. A couple of years ago, I spoke in Peoria in their conference center next to the cathedral, and right next to the cathedral, they have a little museum of Fulton Sheen. And so they have done a lot of work, and wonderful people. Now, you mentioned the propagation of faith. For some of our viewers or listeners, they may never have heard of that, but I sure remember it as a young kid. That was a big annual appeal and helping the poor worldwide, and I knew it was a big operation. Didn't he have a riff with Cardinal Spellman, of the Cardinal of New York, over the propagation of the faith? Can you share that with the audience?
Sure. Well, as Cardinal Spellman, this is a little background, he was responsible for really preparing Sheen and opening all the doors for him to do what he did on television and even somewhat on the radio. And so, I mean, put it this way, Cardinal Spellman's biography was called the America's Pope. That's how highly he was seen, not just in America, but around the world, the European bishops. So he was the former national director for the Society of the Propagation of the Faith. And Sheen was the natural, you can say, successor. So Sheen is brought on in 1950 and made an auxiliary bishop of New York. And Sheen took his responsibility very, very seriously, that every dime that came there would work its way to the poor. And Cardinal Spellman was known as a great gift giver and all these things. And so he never quite left the position in a sense of he would travel and he would use some of the funds and bring gifts to people. Well, Sheen put an end to that and said, well, you can't do that. You can't just use these funds for that. And the big thing is literally came down to nobody ever told Cardinal Spellman no. And when Sheen was the first to do that, immediately things started going bad. And then there was one big rift where it's known as the Milk Fund, where Cardinal Spellman came in possession of what was equivalent to about, I don't know, at least $1 or $2 million, I think, worth of powdered milk. And he gave it to the Society for the Propagation of the Faith, but then wanted payment for it. And Sheen said, no, I know where you got this. And this money is and this, what the value of this and the milk, it's all for the poor. Well, this rift went all the way to the Pope at the time. And right before the Pope, Bishop Sheen was able to provide the evidence to show that Cardinal Spellman was lying. And as soon as the Pope was able to verify that, he lost face with the Pope. And that was it. And Cardinal Spellman basically vowed from that moment, I will destroy you. Immediately after, the show was pulled off the air and nobody saw him on television. Really, I mean, he had a brief stint after the Second Vatican Council, but he was removed. I mean, and then eventually it ended up with him being sent to Rochester. Some say he was given a couple of options to choose where he wanted to go. He didn't want to go to either one, but I guess he chose Rochester. And so it was a hard period of 10 years of his life that really he was put through a major passion. And that's when he wrote one of his greatest works called, many are familiar with this, The Life of Christ. And in the preface of at least one of the versions, he talked about, he wrote it during this time of his life. He never mentioned Cardinal Spellman, but basically alluded to the time when that period ended was the year that Cardinal Spellman died. And then he went into it really changed him for the rest of his times as a bishop and as a preacher.
I think of Saint Faustina, who had advanced tuberculosis, undiagnosed, suffered tremendously. And the nuns in her convent, many of them thought she was faking her pain and weakness. And even she would be sick and be taken to the infirmary, and nuns would walk in and say hello to the other nuns who were sick, but never pull the curtain right next door and say, how are you, sister? Rejection, suffering, trials. And you look at all the saints and so many suffering. For all those out there watching or listening to this, we think of all the trials, this COVID, and so many struggles of people. Just carry your cross and keep going, never give up. And the message of it's all about hope and believing in Jesus Christ. And Fulton Sheen was quite an example. One other question, the Fulton Sheen Institute, where are you at right now in 2022? What are your goals, or what do you think you're supposed to be doing right now?
Well, one of the things I feel called to do, and I'm hoping within the next week to have it launched, is regarding his beatification that was postponed. I think that was the language that was used. Well, there's no intention that I know of anywhere. And I've talked to Rochester. There's no effort right now to finish that. All they got to do is schedule a mass and it's done. And I want to really write that spark of really kind of calling out for it, but doing it in such a way that it's a pledge. I want to get this in front of millions of Catholics. I mean, at least 1 million, with all the networks that are out there, and so many people know him around the world, that they would pledge to basically commit. And I'm kind of working on how, specifically what I'd ask for that would be in line with Fulton Sheen, like a holy hour and rosary, but to gather this pledge, a movement, so that those who are in the positions to make this happen see this, that the laity are driving this. They want this saint, just like John Paul. They was like Santo subito, and when the signs went up, give us a saint right now, immediately. Well, he's already gone through this. This is why it's almost unprecedented that this has been iced the way it has. But there are figures who just hold a lot of animosity toward others in the whole process of things, and I want to show that they're not going to outdo the Holy Spirit. We need this saint now. So that's one of the initiatives. Another one is I'm focusing more on leadership, and in particular men, myself, but my wife's also going to be helping with women, because that's the big crisis that we do have right now is leadership. And there's a lot of brokenness in men and in women that keep them back. And there's spiritual hindrances, but there's also human dimensions that they lack. And Fulton Sheen was such a good example of a man who took great steps of faith, great risks, and just poured himself out. And to be able to provide this kind of leadership formation, and even an element of coaching, because Fulton Sheen says if you want to remake the world, you have to begin by remaking the individual. And we don't quite get that enough. And so that's another big emphasis that I'm focusing on really right now. Those two things are pretty major. And then, of course, the podcast, really growing that, because that's the platform where I can really bring the spirit of Sheen to the here and now. What are the issues? What would he be saying about these things? How would he be able to sift through the lies and deceptions? Because a lot of Catholics don't want to go into certain issues, because if you use this word, you get deplatformed. If you use this, you just get persecution, and I don't want to deal with that. Well, Sheen never cared about that. He says if souls aren't saved, nothing is saved. And the only way that we're going to begin with that is with the truth, and helping Catholics and non-Catholics to know what we're up against, how to expose that, what kind of new civilization are we going to be called to build, and do that right now. And so the podcast is that platform, bringing on really good guests to help convey that message is part of that.
Again, is that address fultonsheen.institute for the podcast, or is that something different?
Well, you can get links to where they are on YouTube. Okay. And in Rumble, because YouTube, I don't have every episode because they blocked a couple of them. But on the Rumble account, and you can simply put in the name of the podcast. Actually is important. The name of the podcast is The Catholic Patriot.
The Catholic Patriot.
The Catholic Patriot. And it's not just American. And it's the emphasis is on Catholic, universal. Which is what we need. We need heroic witnesses in every country around the world to be stepping up. And the Catholic Church has to take the leadership role in this. But like Fulton Sheen said, he said, who's going to save the church? He said, it's not going to be our bishops and priests, but you laity. This is one of his more famous quotes. It is going to be your responsibility to make sure that our bishops act like bishops, our priests act like priests, and our religious act like religious. And it's not meant to be like an in your face, but at the same time, it's we have to step up and take full responsibility of our Catholic faith and our duty to for our apostolic dimension of our life. And we see that with what you're doing and so many other groups that are starting. And I encourage people, take that first step. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking while you were talking about the scripture and the dry bones, and I think of the dry bones in the pews. We need to come to life a little bit. One last question before we wrap up today's show, Dr. Howard. Tell us about the Aroma Rosary.
Sure. Well, that was something my wife started, Aroma Rosary, because the Rosary is such an important prayer and central prayer for our time. It's the one thing Our Lady asks in all of her major apparitions that was consistent: pray the Rosary every day. Vacant Fatima, pray the Rosary every day for peace and end to the war. Well, we're in a war right now, and we're not gonna win it without this prayer. And so my wife has thought of how can we develop something that can be more engaging to our experience of the Rosary. And for our family, we have a great passion for natural health, having our own health freedom. That's actually a big part of the Institute. We have a health freedom project we just launched. I encourage people to check out. We have webinars for that. And that really is how do we have a full incarnational experience with the Rosary as it's meant? So we incorporated this element with using essential oils, which is actually part of our health regimen. And it really caught on, and as people all around the world have loved it. And so I developed, in particular, though, a Fulton Sheen Aroma Rosary that is based off of a rosary that Sheen himself developed called the World Mission Rosary. And I can maybe just pull it out of my pocket, but essentially, it's 5 different colors. You can see yellow, red, white, blue, green, and it represents the 5 major continents and regions of evangelization for the gospel. Yellow, Asia; red, the Americas; white, Europe for the Pope; blue, Oceania; green for Africa. And we pray this every single day, during the weekdays on our YouTube channel at 12 noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, Monday through Friday on our YouTube channel. We pray the Rosary, and we pray it that way. We offer each decade for these countries. So it incorporates the essential oils, which come with each one, and an explanation. Everything's intentional, like what oil is chosen and why. And it's become people's favorite Rosary, as it is mine. It's always in my pocket. So that's how that came about.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, Dr. Howard, I want to thank you so much for joining me today on Mercy Unbound. People, go to the website, look up Fulton Sheen. What a wonderful man. Obviously, he suffered in his life. That's all part of it. We have to carry our cross. But Dr. Howard's doing incredible work. I wish you all the best for your goals in 2022, and stay in touch with us. Okay.
Thank you. Absolutely. It's been a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you.
Thanks so much, and God bless. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video portion. The podcast can be heard at anchor.fm/Dr. Brian, Bryan Thatcher, Thatcher, and on all the major podcast forums. I would love to speak at your church or conference, and please consider supporting our efforts to spread the truth to a hurting world. Thank you again. And for more information, go to the website at drbrianthatcher.com.